So thank you for that introduction. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here today. My favorite people are teachers. And we need to, I don't want to talk for too long because I want to enlist your help in actually making change. We have, as you all know, since you are working inside of school districts, most school districts need a lot more advice from teachers, and they need to pay attention to it. And how do we get there from where we've been? The No Child Left Behind era gave us an even stronger command and control culture, and it's been very destructive. See George laughing, he's familiar. My daughter is actually a high school science teacher in San Francisco public school system, but I get a lot of information from teachers all around the country, and it's not much different anywhere else. But it must be different somewhere, so we need to get some new examples. I'm also, one of my projects is, been frustrated for so long and complaining for 30 years about middle school biology textbooks. How they're the worst, most incomprehensible books you've ever tried to read, with 500 word glossaries and not enough information about any of the words to understand them. So I blame them for all these politicians who hate science and don't believe in climate change because they've been taught science is dogma, so why should they believe it? And I know you're doing a very different. Are there any middle school teachers here? Well, high school. Anyway, so I finally said I might as well try to do something. So the problem with middle school textbooks is they're just copies of college textbooks, dumbed down to less words and less comprehension. So the fact is, my grandson, when he was 12, had the official California book used by the San Francisco public schools, and he was asking me to help him with his homework. That's where I got really involved. I was just astounded by this book. It just complete list of factoids, incomprehensible. He came to me with this diagram where he had to fill in the blanks for homework from some video sheet sold by Pearson, I think it was. What are the steps in DNA ligation when you're trying to clone the human insulin gene? So, he had to memorize, ligation, insertion. I mean, he didn't know what anything of this was, just a diagram. So I said, let's back up a minute. What are they trying to do here? What's the point of this? He said, they're trying to clone a human. Then I went back to 2 pages before that was Dolly the sheep. And then they jumped from that directly to the human insulin gene. So he had no idea what was going on. Then I asked him, what was a cell? Because that's my field. He said, a cell is a box with all these named parts in it, and it's very boring. So it's tragic, we're all laughing, but it's what makes the politicians we have think science is irrelevant. Okay, so I'm going to give I'd like to get feedback from all you. I actually need some help because I'm trying to prepare something completely different for 6th grade, which would basically try to make kids realize that the cell is most amazing thing we know about in the universe. The idea that you could have a chemical system that will self-replicate. And we're trying to use the dictum that you never tell them the answer until they struggle with the problem. So our guess, what we're trying to do is trying to have them struggle to design a self-replicating robot. What would it need for a robot to self-replicate? And after that, we'll talk about itself. But anyway, we're going to test it with students, and whether it will work or not, we don't know. Of course, the textbook publishers don't care anything about the students. They only care about the people in the school districts who adopt their book by looking at the pictures. And this has been true for 40 years, and it's not changing. Okay, so I was 12 years as president, actually, of the National Academy of Sciences, and it was a great education. Education doesn't stop, of course, with school. And I learned that science was even more important than I had thought. And that it's critically important that science teachers, and scientists achieve a much higher degree degree of influence both throughout their nations and the world. And what I'm talking about here is not only an issue for the United States, it's an issue for every country. In 1993, my first trip abroad as Academy President was to go to India. I learned about their first Prime Minister, who was very scientifically minded and had a background in science, Prime Minister Nehru, and he emphasized the importance of science for their new democracy. Why? Well, he said, we have a diverse country, more than 50 languages. The only way our new democracy is going to work is if we have the scientific temper that comes from scientific values. That is, creativity, rationality, openness, and tolerance that are central to science. So ever since I love that, I talk about scientific temper, and I think that's our real mission as science teachers, to try to create a scientific temper in our students. And of course, those middle school textbooks have nothing to do with that. In fact, it does the opposite. Okay, this is a picture taken on the front steps of the Academy, a big Einstein statue with a wonderful lap. Students all come and take their picture there, very friendly, but this is not the image we have for science. It's the image we want, and so how do we get it? So this is something that a parent told me a few years ago after I gave a talk at university. My third grade student just came home from school. Here's what he said: "Now I get it. Science is just like spelling. You just need to memorize it, and it doesn't make any sense." This is incredible. But you can see why I'm going to say that, because look at that middle school textbook. I don't know what this kid was memorizing, probably 30 kinds of whales or something. So this is a picture taken in San Francisco of 12-year-olds back in the days when Ray Cortines was superintendent, a wonderful superintendent. We had a wonderful project called City Science before No Child Left Behind. We had a 5-year project, and it was fantastic. All these hands-on science, the teachers coached in noisy classrooms. This is what science should look like in school. Well, you know, I'm a scientist. Scientists are optimistic because we see progress. Science always goes forward, but education goes every which way. We've lost all this in San Francisco. It went backwards. You know, after No Child Left Behind, well, second of all, Cortines left, the new superintendent didn't care about this anymore, so that didn't support science anymore. But then came No Child Left Behind, when the principals were telling these teachers, elementary teachers we were working with, don't teach science, it's not tested. High stakes tests are in math and literacy, teach to those tests. So we lost a huge amount of, we had a really good thing going, and it disappeared. So this was part of the curriculum when I left for Washington in 1993. I use this with naive audiences, you know this all, but it means something when you don't know. You know, I talk about redefining science education, and the adults I usually talk to don't have any idea what I'm talking about. But this is a great example for kindergarten. It was part of the official curriculum, and when there are seeds on the ground, the kids are given white socks. First year of school, 5-year-olds walk into the trees, come back, and some of the things that stick to their socks will be seeds, because seeds, of course, allow to stick to animal fur, but most of it will be rocks and dirt and stuff. And so their job as a class, so 5-year-olds, is to figure out which are rock and which are dirt, and they give them this little plastic microscope, and it's supposed to draw the shape of everything, every square speck that they pick off their sock and put in the numbered square, and then draw what it looks like. And then they're supposed to suggest which ones are seeds and which are rocks. And of course, the teacher doesn't tell them the answer. They have to wait till some kid says the regular shaped ones may be the seeds, and then the class has to agree that's a reasonable idea, and this goes on for days until they try, well, how will we test this reasonable idea? Until some kid actually suggests that we could plant the regular shaped ones in one pot and the irregular shaped ones in another pot and see if we were right. So this just shows that you could actually do science in kindergarten. Well, sadly, they don't do this anymore in San Francisco. So the vision, of course, is to have an education that includes solving hundreds of such challenges over the course of schooling. And if we did this well, this is our mission, of course, these kids would really be different. They'd be able to meet the workforce needs of the country. Employers complain that our kids can't solve problems, can't work in, on problems that have more than one right answer, which is most problems. And we'd also have people, very importantly, who are able to make wise judgments in our very complicated, confusing society. And finally, adults who reject what I call magical thinking, which seems to be dominating far too many people these days. So there's a special opportunity. I said scientists are optimistic. I've been working on this forever. We have the common core, math and reading, which are very synergistic with what we want for science. Students need to use information to sort, analyze, and critique it to make and defend arguments, to solve problems, and incubate ideas, not only in science, but in all these other disciplines, which are, of course, are the ones that most school districts focus on. So science could be really central to what we're trying to do for kids. So here's a critical question that requires a high-quality, focused research effort. What type of education at the K-12 level can help to create adults who insist on evidence for statements, are thereby able to make wise judgments for themselves, their family, their community, and their nation? You know, our democracy can't survive if people don't base decisions on evidence and rational thinking. So this involves not only science, but science is an important part of this, but all your colleagues who teach other subjects. So much of the blame, I think, lies at the college level for where we are today. When I came to the academy, I didn't want the job, actually. It was a full-time job. I had to leave Ucsf and close my lab. But when I came to the academy, they offered me the job to be an education president. We were doing the National Science Education Standards. We did a lot of work on education, but my members, many of the members of the academy, 2,000 academy members, distinguished scientists, they said, well, this is an important problem, but it's not our problem. It's the problem of the textbooks, the teachers' unions, the school boards, but it's nothing to do with us. Well, what I learned actually is that we, the college level, are actually the rate limiting step. Here's a diagram from one of the Academy reports. The teachers, look where you are, right in the middle of this crush of forces. This is very familiar to you, unfortunately. But there's the universities, faculties of arts and science, and of course they define what science education is. If Biology 1 in college is memorizing all the facts about biology, that is what science education becomes. The good news is that with the Academy's help, college education is starting to change quite drastically. Here's a wonderful, the woman with the star is Robin Wright. She was the dean of biology education at the University of Minnesota. They built a new science building with 16 flat lecture rooms. They hold 200 students. So all of Biology 1 is taught in this active learning mode. And that means, of course, you have to have many different teachers. To get the 2,000 kids, you have to have 10 classrooms. But this is what it looks like, active learning in biology class. This is what looks a lot like the 12-year-olds in San Francisco in that picture I showed earlier. So if kids learn like this, some of them will become teachers. They will really have a different view and a different way of thinking about science education. And very importantly, the parents and the politicians will really understand what science is and what science education should be. And this is starting to spread. And I don't know what's happening in Skyline, but I hope something good. At all levels, we need to make a science out of education. That is, we need to study very carefully with talented people what happens when you do different things with students and what makes students learn best. And this will require a much more focused and effective system of education and research Otherwise, we'll keep on doing what we're doing today. A new superintendent comes in, they promise the school board, they got some magic idea that changed everything. 2 years later, they're out, they moved to Houston from San Francisco as our most recent example. And then, then this is musical chairs of superintendents, which I don't understand. Why they don't want to stay in some place and actually have something happen. And they all have some politically good-sounding magic fix for problems which never work, and the teachers, of course, ignore them completely because they've been there before. So the Academy is trying to change that. When I was there, part of being an education president, we published something like 150 different reports on education. This is a famous one used in many teacher preparation courses, and the best-selling book, Academy, How People Learn Brain Mind Experience in School. It looked at all the research done on learning in the past 30 years and tried to analyze what that means for schooling at the K-12 level, how people learn. And then we published this report called the Strategic Education Research Partnership, which is I've been heavily involved in ever since as chair of the board of this new organization called SERP. The major question posed to the Academy Committee was this: why has research supported innovation and continuous improvement in medicine, agriculture, and transportation, but not in education? And what can we do about it? And so this is a very abbreviated part of the answer. They said that education is missing the equivalent of a teaching hospital in medicine, that is, field sites, places where researchers, teachers, I underline teachers, and designers work together in practice settings to observe, explain, document, replicate, and evaluate practice as a source of new knowledge. What are our best teachers doing, and how can we learn from that to spread good practices, and then define the problems and test solutions in real classrooms, in the real context of schools. So most education research is done by one professor in a school making up a problem that they could work on. Is generally not directly applicable to schools, because, and the reason, of course, it's very much harder to work in the real world setting. It's very confusing and complicated. So the first field site, because Tom Payson, who was the superintendent of schools at Boston at the time, was on the SERP committee, he asked Boston to become the first field site, and Catherine Snow at Harvard, who was a reading expert, a wonderful person, took on this problem that the school district identified. Kids get to high school, they drop out, they can't understand the textbooks. And then creates a whole new field then called middle school literacy, or adolescent literacy, where you try to figure out why kids can't understand textbooks. And what interventions can we do in real middle school classrooms that could prepare them for high school. I mean, it turns out that we stopped teaching reading really at 4th grade when kids can decode, but decoding is not enough to understand. So one of the findings when they did this research is that there's a whole set of words called academic language, which all of us know, and which are very frequent in textbooks, but which kids, unless they come from certain backgrounds, most kids don't use at home, and they don't use it in their peer groups. Words like analyze, right? It turns out that when you have a word like analyze, you have to use it in 7 different connections on average before you could actually understand it well enough to understand your textbook when you come across that word. So that led to a huge amount of work in the Boston area, creating the first free product called Word Generation, which are debates that kids have in middle school, 15 minutes a day in different classrooms, on interesting questions using words like analyze, different words, sets of words each week. And they're on motivating questions like, should you need a license to have a baby? Or should you be able to rent a pet? All these, anyway, questions that kids find interesting instead of boring. So. And then they made videos of teachers using this stuff to help actually spread this. And this word generation just is free on the web and is being used widely across the United States in various teachers and school districts. And then they had these more use-inspired products. Some of them are for math. There's an example. Math. We have a few things for middle school science, nothing for high school. Middle school science, I'm trying to work on that cell unit, a few weeks of lessons. Here's an example. I like this especially because if you weren't a researcher inside of a school district, you would never come up with this. As you know, principals are supposed to evaluate you by walking into your room. And how's a principal going to actually know they're teaching good science? Because they have to know science, math, English, social studies. So the research team working with real principals in San Francisco schools actually came up with this 5x8 card that the principal has, what they're supposed to do. And they're supposed to just look at these issues, and it applies to any subject, really. Here, how often did students say a second sentence? Not just say one word or one sentence and reply to the teacher's question, but how often do they say a second sentence? Here's another one. Students talk about each other's thinking, not just their own. How often did that happen? So on. So basically, there's been lots of materials prepared for principals to help them evaluate teachers, but they don't work because the principals don't have enough time to learn all that stuff. And so this is really the essence of what happens when you actually work in the context of real schools. All this is up on the website. Website's given there. And this is just the home page of the website. And all this curriculum is free. Okay, I'm going to shift. Then I came back to, after 12 years in Washington, my lab had closed. I came back to San Francisco and I started teaching again, graduate students at Ucsf, cell biology, of course. But then I got another job offer I didn't want. A science magazine to be editor-in-chief, and they said again I could focus on education. So that's only a half-time job, so I didn't have to move again. I was in Washington only half the time. And it was great to have control of the editorial page. This is one of something like 50 editorials I wrote, teaching real science. I love this picture, this little kid looking at a plant, because it was exactly the time when my grandson, then a freshman at Lowell High School, supposed to be a great academic high school in San Francisco, my grandson, I said, well, what did you learn? And he said, we learned the parts of a plant. He had told me that biology was the worst course he had ever taken. And I said, did you ever look at a plant? No, we look at the picture in the textbook and we memorize the picture. So this is... the real fun was having these special issues on education. The last one was the grand challenges in science education. And that allowed me to actually work on what was in the magazine and recruit authors. I usually didn't have time to do that. So an urgent challenge today is, as you all know, I don't have to tell you that it's much easier to test for science words than for science understanding and abilities. We have terrible tests, fill-in-the-blank tests that forces trivialization of science education and drive most students, including many potential scientists, away from science. And so here's one of the articles in that special issue. All this is free on the web. I'll show you the website if you want to read it. Those are all short, they're like 3-page articles. This is by Jim Pellegrino, who's one of the real leaders in computer-based science assessments and trying to break through this barrier where, for $50 a kid, you could give really good science tests that we used to give in the Golden State exams, for example, where the teachers graded over the summer. But school districts don't want to invest $50 per kid. So they spend $1 a kid for a horrible Scantron exam that describes terrible teaching. So the promise is that using computers you can make inexpensive tests, in principle, that nevertheless are of high quality and drive good teaching instead of bad teaching. But it's still a work in progress, and this is the statement of where we are. So the other thing we did is we looked at the framework for the next generation science standards, which emphasize the practice of science and talk about high school students engaging in critical reading of primary scientific literature. And so with that stimulus, we got money from NSF to develop a special website for high school and college teachers. And here it is. It's called Science in the Classroom. Again, it's free. And currently there are 80 science papers that have been annotated and ready for use in the classroom. These are carefully chosen to be articles that are accessible at the high school and college level. The important thing is that they're annotated. So you click on this learning lens over here, you click on glossary, and all these science words pop up in green, and if you scroll over it, it gives you the definition what that word means. If you turn on previous work or Arthur's experiments and things like that, the figures, which are of course essential in every paper, are expanded to help explain what each part of the figure means. And very importantly, we want kids to understand science, how science works. And so you go to the references and try to say which of these references represent the scientists building on somebody else's data, and which represent them contradicting somebody else's data. And so these references are annotated to why they were there. Why are those references there? This is Melissa McCarthy, who's a young PhD in neuroscience, who's been running this project, and she very much wants teacher feedback and help in making the website more usable and effective. So if anybody wants to volunteer, I can connect you. I gave you my email on the first slide. I'll put it back at the end. And then when I left science, my parting gift was the AAAS, which runs science, gave us permission to put up all the educational material on a free website, so you don't have to subscribe to Science Magazine. So on this website, the Science Education Portal, everything that we did, all the special issues, we had prizes for the best college curriculum, prizes for the 2 years of prizes of the best science websites and so on. They're all up on this website. So if you Google, I guess, Science Magazine Education Portal, you'll find it. So now here's the main point, which is why I really need your help. I'm looking for school districts who would be willing to do experiments, and I'm trying to get a foundation to support small experiments. So probably not a big school district, not a huge one, not a tiny one with one school. But, so if you are in a school district you think would be willing to do this, really empower the best teachers to help the school districts make better decisions. Instead of telling teachers what to do based on some idea that came either from the state or the feds or from the head of some bureaucrat, actually use your wisdom. I would say that education in public schools are one of the few places that hasn't learned that what U.S. industry learned about the power of using knowledge from the shop floor, as they said, in the automobile industry, to really make better progress in whatever you're doing. All the corporations now use their marketing people to collect information about what's wrong with the product, but we don't do that either for students or teachers. So here's what keeps me up at night, and I'm so very worried about this because I'm really impressed that you guys stay in this system. Some of you probably have very good leadership, but most of what I see is teachers trying to avoid the terrible things that districts are trying to do to them. First of all, our best teachers need to have much more influence on the education system. This influence is needed at every level, from school districts to states to the federal government. And it needs to be institutionalized somehow. It can't just be, by chance somebody's asking a teacher something. We need to have examples of how you could institutionalize it. This is, took me a long time at the academy. I was putting outstanding teachers on all the education committees, but there might be 4 teachers on the education committee, and there are 8 academics, and academics are used to talking over teachers. So the teachers didn't have enough influence. So finally, after about 6 years or so, I can't remember, we formed a National Teacher Advisory Council that's also still going, with a rotating group every 3 years of the best science and math teachers at all levels. And these teachers had to actually be at least 50% in the classroom, because we wanted teachers who were still in the classroom. That's an important aspect of where I think we're failing. We move teachers into the central bureaucracy and they get lost. And the teachers they're out of touch, other teachers don't respect them anymore. We need to have people making policy who are actually living the policy. They're teaching at least half time. So the California Teacher Advisory Council was then established in Sacramento. That's still going. It's run by the California Council on Science and Technology, trying to make connections to the legislature and education leaders in Sacramento. So what I've learned, I just want to mention UCSF Science Education Partnership, because this is where we've all learned. Most of the scientists who actually are involved in the kind of efforts I'm talking about learned about what the needs are by interacting with outstanding teachers. And we've had a partnership for a long time, since 30 years now. This is an old slide, almost 30 years. Science Education Partnership with science volunteers contributing huge amounts of time. They're active in 90% of the San Francisco schools. A lot of volunteers every year, mostly students and postdocs, very young scientists, and they're trained before they can go into the schools how to behave and they only do what the teachers want. They don't, it's a true partnership. So these are the map of the schools where they've been. Now the problem is, so UCSF has been trying to help, Cal Academy, San Francisco State, Exploratorium, but all of us are basically doing things after school in the summer, not really affecting in a serious way what happens during the school day. That's the way school systems have been designed, to keep even well-meaning professionals out, which I think is a big mistake. And so teachers, anyway, in this process, of course, is where we learn what's happening. We discovered how poorly most school systems are run. And they come to realize, this is a quote from a former outstanding principal in San Francisco, that experienced, effective teachers are a vastly underutilized resource in education systems, perhaps the only research that can truly create the change and improvements that students and teachers deserve. This is from a heroic former principal at a very needy school who just recently retired in San Francisco. So I started this whole, trying to start a movement called Empowering Great Teachers. This editorial was just written this last January. Now is the time to create a national movement that empowers our teachers. And the question is, how do you do that when you're working against established bureaucracies? So I just want to leave that for the discussion. And I'd like your advice, and we can talk a lot more about that. But I just want to talk about this last slide, this sort of uplifting. This is why science is so important in my mind. It's not so that students can learn about the endoplasmic reticulum and all that stuff. It's so they can understand the nature of science and start to think like a scientist in their everyday life. And this is a quote from one of my favorite books written by a physicist, Jacob Burtowski, called Science and Human Values, still in print. You can get it for $10, a paper book. Burtowski, as a young man in the British Army, flew over Hiroshima and Nagasaki and saw the destruction of the atomic bomb, and that deeply depressed him because it made him think that maybe science was bad for the world rather than good for the world. And he spent 10 years writing, reading, and thinking, and he came up with this book, which concludes, of course, that science on balance is strongly positive force in the world. He said the society of scientists is simple because it has a directing purpose to explore the truth. Nevertheless, it has to solve the problem of every society, which is to find a compromise between the individual and the group. It must encourage the single scientist to be independent and the body of scientists to be tolerant. From these basic conditions, which form the prime values, there follows step by step a range of values: dissent, freedom of thought and speech, justice, honor, human dignity, and self-respect. Science has humanized our values. Men have asked for freedom, justice, and respect, precisely as the scientific spirit has spread among them. So this kind of idea is what I think underlies many of our passions for science education, and we need to have American education leaders understand that this is what we're about. We're not about making sure that everybody knows what the endoplasmic reticulum is. I never learned what the endoplasmic reticulum was till I was a professor. Now, of course, in the old California standards at least, that was required. In 6th grade, I think it was. Memorize a sentence, what the endoplasmic reticulum is. This is crazy. It doesn't help anybody with anything. You just preach politicians as adults who hate science. So, thank you, and I'm very much looking forward to your input and help. So I hope you will contact me if you have ideas and help. So one of the things I want to emphasize is, are any of you in a school district that's not just one school, in a school district you think is doing the right thing for teachers, and can we use that as a model? So if some of you would say something about that, it'd be great. Thank you.